Coming up today, the Speaker of Korea's National Assembly calls on the rival parties to quickly reach a deal on redrawing electoral districts, or he will exercise his authority and do it himself. Officials from Korea and Japan meet in Tokyo for another round of reconciliation talks over the Japanese military's use of Korean women as sex slaves during the Second World War. Plus, with China's currency expected to weaken even further against the US dollar, Korea's exporters are facing a struggle to stay competitive. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Tuesday, the 15th of December. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. And we start at Korea's National Assembly, where the Speaker has called the leaders of the main rival parties together in an effort to move them towards a compromise on redrawing the nation's electoral map after they failed to do so in November. For more details, we have our National Assembly correspondent, Ji Myung-gil, on the line. So, Myung-gil, what can you tell us?
Good afternoon, Mark. Well, the meeting is still in session, but we hear that not much progress is being made. National Assembly Speaker Chung Yoo-ah has indicated that if the rival parties fail to find a solution by the end of the month, he would have to step in and take action. Chung said he would hold a press conference on Wednesday to explain what that would entail, in addition to outlining the problems that could ensue if the task goes unfinished. The redistricting issue arose following a ruling by the Constitutional Court last year that said the current electoral map is unconstitutional because it perpetuates unequal representation due to changes in the population. The only thing that the parties have agreed on so far is to keep the number of assembly seats at the current 300. They're at odds over the number of elected parliamentary seats versus the number of proportional representatives. If the map isn't redrawn quickly, it could cause confusion during candidate registration for an upcoming general election in April, which starts today. That's all for now. Mark?
Well, thank you very much, Myung-gil, for that report. Now, staying with domestic political news, and Ahn Cheol-soo, the man making headlines for quitting the Liberal Party he helped co-found, is making his way around Korea to drum up support for his plans to go it alone and start his own party. He is heading to areas where he is pretty popular, but the IT expert turned political heavyweight might have a tough time convincing some that he's made the right decision. Lee Soo-won has this report.
Former opposition leader Ahn Cheol-soo has already taken his political comeback tour on the road. After his departure from the main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy on Sunday, Ahn traveled to Korea's southern port city of Busan on Tuesday, where he continued efforts to secure a solid support base. In the morning, Ahn met with regional reporters to discuss his future plans. Later this afternoon, the business tycoon turned politician will hold talks with the city's young entrepreneurs at the Busan Economic Promotion Agency. After that, he will drop by a daycare facility in the city. In a nationwide poll by local polling agency Realmeter regarding Ahn's departure from the NPAD, almost half of the respondents said they approved of his decision. However, in the southern Jeollabuk-do and Jeollanam-do provinces, considered a hotbed of support for the liberal camp, the positive response fell short of 35%. Analysts say that the result is an indication of the regional concern that a split of the liberal vote will lead to a defeat in general elections in April next year. The lukewarm response in those provinces makes Ahn's visit to Gwangju in Jeollanam-do province on Thursday a litmus test as to whether the region will support him if he runs for president in 2017. Currently, Ahn Cheol-soo is fourth in a poll comparing potential presidential candidates with 10.1% support, up 1.8 percentage points from last week. Lee Soo-won, Arirang News.
Now, China's currency, the yuan, recently hit a 4.5-year low against the US dollar. And with the policies Beijing has instituted, the yuan is expected to keep weakening. And this would not be good news for Korea, particularly the nation's exporters. Our Kim Min-ji tells us why.
Will the Chinese yuan depreciate even further? According to a Bloomberg survey of 64 foreign investment banks, the yuan is expected to trade at an average of 6.61 against the US dollar at the end of next year, which means on year the Chinese currency is forecast to lose 2.3% of its value. Already last week, the yuan hit its lowest level against the dollar in more than 4 years. This after China announced that it intends to depeg the yuan from the dollar and instead manage the yuan to track a basket of 13 currencies, including the dollar, euro, and yen, which would give the yuan room to fall further against the dollar. Analysts see the move as an attempt to manage the yuan's weakness against the greenback ahead of a widely expected U.S. rate hike this week, as a strengthening dollar in turn would raise the value of the yuan. China has been cutting interest rates to loosen monetary policy and boost its slowing growth. Some analysts warn, however, that the decline in the value of the yuan could trigger competitive devaluations, as other nations could weaken their respective currencies to maintain trade competitiveness. Analysts say Korea, considered one of the most vulnerable to a weak yuan, will likely see slower exports due to weak price competitiveness in areas it competes with China. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's finance minister has emphasized the important role the nation's corporate sector has in boosting Korea's ultra-low birth rate. Meeting with the leaders of 5 private economic organizations on Tuesday, Choi Kyung-hwan said Korea is suffering from an unprecedented low birth rate, and he expressed concern that the number of economically active people will start to decline from 2017. He pointed out that such a trend will inevitably dent Korea's growth potential. For that reason, Minister Choi urged the corporate sector to create an environment where employees can strike a comfortable balance between their work life and their family life. Korea's birth rate is about 1.2 children per woman. That is one of the lowest in the entire world. Now, the unresolved issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of tens of thousands of Korean women tops the agenda for talks between Korea and Japan today. For more, let's connect to our Gwon-soa at Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry. So, Soa, this is the 11th round of talks on this subject. Can we expect any tangible outcome from today's meeting?
Well, Mark, that's what Seoul is hoping for, as it's not only the 11th round of talks since the first round was held in April 2014, but the end of the year is approaching, meaning this could be the last chance for the two sides to forge an agreement this year. Now, just like in previous talks, Korea is represented by the Foreign Ministry's Northeast Asian Bureau Chief Lee Sang-duk and Japan by his counterpart Kimihiro Ishikane. Now, while Seoul will be pushing for a formal apology and compensation from Japan for the sexual enslavement of Korean women by the Japanese military during the Second World War, Japan wants to approach the issue on a purely humanitarian level. Tokyo claims that the issue was settled under a 1965 bilateral treaty that normalized relations between the two countries. Now, although President Park previously called for greater momentum toward a resolution by the end of this year during her first summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, with the years of discord on the issue, there are doubts that the two sides will be able to narrow their differences at these talks. Now, even if Japan does apologize, only 46 of the 238 Korean victims registered as so-called comfort women are still alive today to hear that apology, and one of them died just 10 days ago. Now, that's all I have for now, but I'll be having more updates as the meeting progresses. Mark?
Now, in some other news, the highest-ranking official in the U.S. military says Washington needs to prepare to fight trans-regional, multi-domain and multi-functional conflicts. Speaking at a U.S. defense conference in Washington on Monday local time, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, emphasized that North Korea's development of its ballistic missile capabilities has now started to affect other regional actors such as Japan. General Dunford stressed that Pyongyang's ICBM technology, as well as its cyber and space capabilities, have made the North a multifaceted threat. He said the US has to boost efforts to ensure that it is optimally prepared for the fight. US President Barack Obama says his country is hitting the Islamic State group harder than ever. Speaking at the Pentagon after chairing a rare National Security Council meeting on Monday local time, Obama said the US-led coalition launched more airstrikes against the extremist group in November than in any other month. That killed a number of its leaders and destroyed their oil facilities. Obama also noted that ISIS has not had a single successful ground operation since 2014. However, the US president did acknowledge the US and its partners faced a more difficult fight in the future. His speech comes as US citizens have grown increasingly concerned about the threat of terrorism at home, following a recent mass shooting in Southern California that killed 14 people. Now back here in Korea, and Hyundai Motors executive class sedan, the Aslan, has been awarded the best safety rating among all new cars released this year in Korea. The Transport Ministry says other local models also fared well, with all but one being awarded the highest safety grade. Ahn Cheol-soo has this report.
Korea's Transport Ministry has released the results of its annual safety tests of new cars on Tuesday. 12 models were tested, 6 from Korean brands and 6 from imported brands. The tests look at how safe the cars are for both driver and passengers, as well as how safe they are for pedestrians. They also look at driving safety issues, such as braking and the likelihood of a rollover. The 2015 Hyundai Aslan received the highest rating, with a score of 97.3 out of 100. It's the highest score for any car in the 3 years since the government began testing. A Grade 1 safety award was also given to the Infiniti Q50 and the Ssangyong Tivoli, as well as 5 other models. The Tivoli was also rated as the safest car for the relatively low price. A Grade 2 was awarded to the Mini Cooper and the Hyundai Granda HEV, the only Korean car not to be in the top tier. But the Ford Taurus and the Volkswagen Polo had the ignominy of being given this year's lowest marks. The Taurus was ranked especially low on the pedestrian safety tests. The ministry concluded that although safety standards have gone up on average, it's still the more expensive cars that have the better safety grades, leaving consumers who are on a budget with fewer choices for safe cars. The ministry has also promised to expand the test criteria in the future so it can assess the latest cutting-edge safety technology. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, one of Korea's largest ever sales events, K-Sale Day, wraps up today, and looking at the preliminary sales figures, it appears the event was a roaring success. The Trade and Industry Ministry says sales compared to the same period last year went up an average of 8.4% to around $450 million at the 25 retailers that took part. The vast majority of traditional markets that participated also saw their sales go up by more than 10%. The ministry says it will review the event to ensure next year's is even bigger and better. The government launched the sales event in late November with around 1,000 participating stores and booths in a bid to boost consumer spending. Now, as we all know, December is a month packed with year-end gatherings for catching up with friends, co-workers and acquaintances, and these events often include alcohol, especially here in Korea. But a local professor is saying that some Koreans may want to cap, really, their holiday cups and put something else in there, as even small amounts of alcohol can be dangerous for a sizable proportion of the population. Son Jong-in has this report.
According to Kang Bo-seung, professor of emergency medicine at Hanyang University Guri Hospital, roughly 40% of people of East Asian descent, including people from Korea, China, and Japan, experience flushed cheeks, nausea, or drowsiness after drinking alcohol. That's because many Asians have an inactive variant of the enzyme that is normally responsible for breaking down alcohol. People with the enzyme deficiency who drink put themselves at risk for a heart attack or a blood clot in the brain, so they should avoid alcohol completely. Kang's report was published in the U.S. Journal of Neurology, and it was issued to refute an earlier study by local researchers. Last month, a team of neurologists at Seoul National University Hospital in Bundang released a report that said drinking 3 to 4 shots of soju reduced the risk of stroke for men by around 50%.
Kang claimed that the study overlooked the genetic difference between Westerners and East Asians in the body's ability to break down alcohol. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, if you're an owner of a remote-controlled aircraft in the United States, then you will be required to register your drone with the Federal Aviation Administration. The agency announced on Monday that US residents must register their devices by February 19th and say whether it's a new purchase or a drone that's been flying for years. The registration will cost a mere $5 and will be valid for 3 years. Penalties for failing to register could reach $27,500 in civil fines and potentially all the way up to $250,000 and 3 years in prison for criminal penalties. The enforced law comes as drones have exploded in popularity over the last several years, especially in the US, and this is becoming a concern for the government agency responsible for regulating the nation's airspace. Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in to our newscast, and we'll be back throughout the day with more news bulletins. Until then, goodbye.